Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Joseph Woodbury. Joseph is the co-founder and CEO of Neighor.com. Simply put, Neighor matches people that have vacant space with people looking for somewhere to store their cars, RVs, boats, personal items. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this. When I got the contact, I was like, this is something that I haven't heard of. But before we get into what Neighor does, let me get into your background. When was the first time that you remember real estate or these parts of kind of maximizing real estate came into focus for you?
Well, we actually started out on the demand side. It was my co-founder that had the idea for the company, and he needed storage and ran into the same problems I think most people run into. All the storage facilities close by were totally full, which, I mean, that's a pretty big problem. I mean, I think the nationwide occupancy rate is like 92%, 93%.
Yeah.
So he was going to have to drive a half hour to the closest facility with an opening and pay, $300 or $400 a month for his unit. And he just thought, there's got to be a friend that can let me store. He found a friend that let him store in his garage. And 4 months later, when he picked his stuff up, he just thought this was such a better experience. I felt a lot of peace of mind in a nice, clean garage in a neighborhood I trusted. Plus, I saved a ton of money. Like, why doesn't everyone do this? Why hasn't someone created a directory or a marketplace where people could go book the space that's already built, already sitting there, just empty, and no one's using it? So we actually started on the demand side. And then, as we built into it, it turns out the supply side, the people listing their space,
Yeah.
they are kind of overjoyed with this passive income they're getting.
So where did it start to expand residentially and then into commercial? Because I'm seeing these use cases and then I'm really getting it where people like, it's so much easier to drop a shed in. But as you were saying before, I can see buying properties just to use Neighor. They're depending on where you are, where you go. If you're buying vacant land, it doesn't have to be, you're not looking for land to build on. You're looking for land to store on, right? Totally different, buy boxes here.
Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, when we first started this, we thought this was a pure residential play, and that's what we were focused on. And we scaled that until we had active users in basically every city in the country. We're the first storage operator to have renters in all 50 states. Um, but it was COVID. That's what drove the commercial opportunity. Is we had a lot of people reaching out to us saying, "Hey, we noticed your platform. We noticed you're driving a lot of this residential revenue. Would you be open to us listing our strip mall on your platform?" And at first we were like, "Oh, that could be interesting, I guess." We did some pilots, and
Yeah.
it was really successful. Um, it I mean, just from a location standpoint, all the storage facilities, they're all industrially zoned, so they're in like very undesirable locations.
Yeah. For
Whereas,
retail. Yeah.
for self-storage, for traditional self-storage. Whereas like where people are in commercial districts. That's where they work. That's where they shop. And they're in residential districts. And that's what Neighor does is we create storage in residential districts and in commercial districts, not in industrial districts.
Right. Yeah. It's a completely different model and you can do it at really any scale. I think that's what's interesting to someone out there listening. They can say like, well, let me think about my 10 unit building. We actually have a lot of space in the back. We're not really needing to put in amenities, but could that be an option? Yeah. Figuring out how to make more income is what people are always after. And this is something that will just make it easier for them.
Yeah, and I think that's an important piece of this as well. Is like we've talked a lot about Neighor, and Neighor is like a use case for this, but there's this broader story going on right now of like full property monetization, where a lot of property managers are starting to realize, especially the good property managers are starting to realize, I shouldn't just focus on an asset class. Um, I should think more in terms of I own a property. How much money can I make off of that property? How can I
Yeah.
maximize NOI? And there's all sorts of opportunities cropping up. Neighor is one of them, but there's many others. And people are having to get creative because some of the old opportunities for ancillary are getting shut down.
Let's go back to the origins though. When you first started and it was residentially based, let's talk about the spots in people's homes that they started to do at first, and then how you saw it grow into more things. Because this, I think, is really relevant to any investor who, any homeowner who owns a property, that maybe there's potentially a way to earn more income, as we were saying before, without housing people, which comes with more wear and tear and more obligations.
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of people like to start out with the exterior spaces because it's easier to think about. They'll list a driveway or an RV pad. Garages are hands down our most popular
Yeah.
space in residential. Take a garage stall and rent it out. But as you know, it's an economics play. As they get addicted to that passive income, they start to invest. They'll add a couple sheds in the back that are
Yeah.
lockable that they'll rent out because they return quickly, and it's a very low capex investment. Some people, it's kind of funny. They'll roll this out, and the initial calculation is like, okay, I make $2,300 in rent off a property. My mortgage is $2,000. I'm netting $300 a month in net income. And Neighbor comes along and nets me an additional $300 a month on that property. I just doubled my net by adding
Yeah.
Neighbor because it's zero cost. And that's a nice and it's attractive. They roll it out across their portfolio, but then the wheels start turning and they're like, wait a second, I could buy a dedicated Neighbor property. And, to give you some math on that,
Yeah.
we're based out of Salt Lake, so I'll use Salt Lake numbers. If you had $500,000 to invest, that buys you roughly a townhome in Salt Lake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Maybe.
maybe, yeah, exactly. And so that maybe is going to drive $2,000 a month. Call it $25,000 a year in rents, 30,000 maybe. If you
Yeah.
were to do a short-term rental, maybe you'd get 35, 40K in annual rents. But if you were to instead take that 500K and buy an empty lot, you could buy anywhere from an acre to 2 acres in Salt Lake City. And that would net you 100K a year in annual rents. And so all of a sudden they start just buying properties straight for Neighbor.
I think it's a testament to you guys that you were able to kind of start with one smaller idea and then pivot as things change to what the demands were out there. Because I think some people can say, hey, look, well, the model's working, let's just stick with that. But you definitely expanded. So you have supply demand sectors both interested in the product, as, of course, that'll help you grow.
Yeah, I mean, and it all fits with the mission, which is we think like it's kind of crazy that the industry spends $5 billion a year just on new construction. We've now built more storage facilities in the US, the industry has, than Starbucks, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Wendy's, Burger King's, Home Depot's, Walmart's, and Costco's combined. That's how much storage the country has built. And
Yeah.
we're like, wait a second, there is there are millions and millions of square feet of storage already built, already sitting there. No one's using it.
Yeah.
And so the mission is to take all the unused space, whether it's residential space, whether it's commercial space, any unused space, and utilize it for storage. It's so much more efficient. It makes a bunch of people money. It's better for the environment. And you talk about the environmental cost of just the concrete and steel that goes into new construction of a storage facility.
Yeah.
Why aren't we using the space we already built?
Yeah, and that's a compliment to the housing shortage to be able to say, well, let's use this area for effective storage solutions. And then maybe that can be quasi residential. It is a little bit off the beaten path, but no one's going to complain if it's the cheaper options for living right now.
Right.
And I think
That's
towns and cities will adjust to that as well. Everybody knows they need more units in the areas. So if they can, reconstruct the use options for industrial to allow that, residential, and then figure out other options for storage. I mean, I would say nobody needs storage, but they need storage. You don't want to need it, but then you do. If you're downsizing or if you're upsizing or you have, toys, that's where they go.
Well, look, I mean, it used to be that the affordable housing crisis existed in coastal markets, SF, New York, Miami, et cetera. But there's an affordable housing crisis everywhere in our home market of Salt Lake City, in
Oh,
markets
yeah.
like Austin or Milwaukee, like everywhere, there's this affordable housing crisis. And if you can't buy a home big enough for your family and your belongings, you buy a home big enough for your family and you store your belongings because it's a cheaper cost per square foot than home space.
Yeah.
So like storage it used to be, I think, a kind of superfluous good where it was like a nice to have, it like helps keep things separate. But in a lot of cities these days, it's a must have.